She was a translator, Dad. She sat at a desk. My half-brother said that to our father for years. He said it so many times it became the official version. Then he filed it with a federal agency. The woman who chaired the hearing panel had decoded my field reports every night for 11 months. I didn't know that yet. Not when I pulled into the parking lot at the VA regional office in Richmond. Not when I sat in my car with the engine off, watching the July heat bend the air above the asphalt. I found out the same moment Vernon did. The difference is, I survived what came after. He didn't. My name is Annette Blackwood. I'm 41 years old. I spent 14 years in the United States Army, 11 months of which were spent inside a safe house in Erbil, northern Iraq, running human sources through a hostile tribal network and transmitting encrypted field reports to a joint task force I'll never be allowed to name. During my extraction, a round from a 7.62 grazed the back of my neck from right to left. The scar is white now, raised about 3 inches long, just below my hairline. I keep my hair down. I lift my collar when someone stands too close behind me. My handlers documented that tick before I even knew I had it. My half-brother Vernon told the VA I made it all up. He told them I was a translator who never left the wire. He told our father I was stealing from the government. He filed a formal challenge to my 80% disability rating, and he got our cousin Marcus to sign an affidavit swearing to a version of my service that never happened. Vernon has never held a security clearance. He has never deployed. He pours concrete for a living and bills the county for overages. But he looked at my life, saw nothing he could touch or measure, and decided that meant there was nothing there. He was wrong about that. The hearing was scheduled for 10:15 on a Tuesday morning. I arrived at 9:40. I backed into a spot near the far edge of the lot, away from the entrance. The way I've parked every vehicle I've driven since Erbil. Sight lines. Old habit. The kind you don't bother trying to break because your body made the decision for you a long time ago. I turned the engine off. The AC died. Within 30 seconds, the car was an oven. I didn't get out. I pulled up the voicemail instead. I've had it saved for 9 years, transferred it across 3 phones, backed it up to a drive I keep in a fireproof box in my closet. It's 11 seconds long. My mother's voice, recorded 4 months before she died. I know you can't tell me where you are. Just come home, baby. She was a school teacher, 4th grade, Guilford County, North Carolina. She had a way of reading to her students where she'd do different voices for every character, and the kids loved her for it. She'd been doing it for 22 years when the diagnosis came. Stage 3, breast cancer. By the time it reached stage 4, I was already in Erbil, sleeping on a cot, in a safe house with blackout curtains and a sat phone I couldn't use for personal calls. I didn't call her, not once in 11 months. Not because I didn't want to, because I couldn't. The cover required total communication isolation. No calls home, no emails, no letters with a return address that might land on a desk in the wrong country, and unravel a network that had taken 7 months to build. So I didn't hear her voice when she was afraid. I didn't hear her voice when the chemo stopped working. I didn't hear her voice at the end. I heard it after. This voicemail. 11 seconds. Left on a Tuesday, she died on a Thursday. 2 days later. I played it in the parking lot with the windows up and the heat pressing against my chest and the sweat already collecting along the scar on my neck. The humidity makes it ache. Always has. Like the tissue remembers what happened and the weather reminds it. If you've ever been the person in the family who couldn't explain, who couldn't defend, couldn't correct, couldn't even show up when it mattered most, and watch someone else fill that silence with a story about you that was completely wrong, then you already know where this is going. Stay with me. I flexed my neck, felt the pull of the scar, pressed my thumb against the ridge of it through my hair, and held it there for a moment, the way you press a bruise just to confirm it's real. She wasn't entirely wrong, my mother. Come home was the right ask. I just couldn't do it on her schedule, and by the time I came home, her house was empty, and Vernon had already started telling people what kind of daughter I was. The kind who disappeared, the kind who didn't show up for the funeral, the kind who probably wasn't doing anything important enough to justify the absence. He wasn't entirely wrong about the disappearing. I did disappear. For 11 months, I was a ghost inside a city that would have killed me if it knew my real name. I ate alone. I slept alone. I ran sources alone, meeting them in tea shops and parking garages and the back rooms of carpet stores, building trust with men who would have slit my throat if they'd known who was paying me. I wrote field reports every night on a secured terminal the size of a lunchbox. Assessment, source reliability, intelligence gaps, targeting recommendations. Every night for 11 months. Those reports went to Fort Meade. Someone decoded them. Someone read them. Someone turned my words into coordinates that kept people alive. I didn't know who that someone was. Not then. Vernon wouldn't have cared even if I could have told him. Vernon measures the world in sweat and concrete. If he can't see the calluses, the work didn't happen. If you come home quiet instead of loud, you must not have done anything worth being loud about. That's the thing about people like Vernon. They don't just ignore what they can't understand. They replace it. They build a version of you that fits inside their world. And they tell that version to everyone until it becomes the truth. The version Vernon built was this. Annette Blackwood sat in an air-conditioned tent on a base in Iraq, translated some documents, came home with a minor neck strain, and then gamed the VA system for an 80% disability rating she didn't earn. That version let him do two things. First, it let him tell our father that I didn't deserve my share of the estate. Second, it let him file a formal fraud challenge against my benefits. He did both. Our father, Arthur, listened. Arthur's 83. He's a good man in the ways that are easy. Birthdays, handshakes, showing up. But he never understood my silence. I'd come home from deployments and he'd ask me what I did over there, and I'd say, I processed foreign language assets. That's all I'm cleared to say. Every time. The same 7 words. After a while, he stopped asking. After a while, Vernon started answering for me. She was a translator, Dad. She sat at a desk. Arthur didn't push back. Not because he's cruel, because the explanation was simple, and simple is comfortable, and Vernon said it with enough confidence that questioning it would have meant questioning his own son. So Arthur let it stand. And when Vernon told him I was stealing from taxpayers, Arthur's face did something I'd never seen before. Not anger, disappointment. The kind that comes from believing you raised someone honest and learning you were wrong. He was wrong, but not about me. The fraud challenge arrived at my apartment in a manila envelope on a Wednesday in March. I read it standing at my kitchen counter. Vernon's name on the complainant line. The allegation that I had fabricated or exaggerated my service record to obtain benefits I was not entitled to. Attached was an affidavit from Marcus Wright, our cousin, stating that he had personal knowledge that I had served as a translator and had never left the forward operating base. Marcus has never been to Iraq. Marcus works at a feed supply store in Kernersville. Marcus signed that affidavit because Vernon stood in his kitchen and told him it was the right thing to do, and Marcus has never once in his life told Vernon no. I set the envelope on the counter. I poured a glass of water. I drank it slowly. I didn't call Vernon. I didn't call my father. I didn't call Marcus. I called my VA representative and confirmed the hearing date. Then I sat on my couch in the dark for a long time and pressed my thumb against the scar on my neck and thought about the last source I ran in her bill. His code name was Carpenter. He was 54. He sold electrical supplies from a shop near the Citadel. He had 3 daughters. He gave me targeting intelligence on an IED cell operating south of the city because he believed, for reasons I will never fully understand, that I would keep his family safe. I kept his family safe. I did my job. Every night, encrypted and transmitted. Every night for 11 months. And my half-brother told a federal panel I made it up. The VA regional office smelled like floor wax and recycled air, and the particular staleness of a building where the ventilation was designed in 1986 and never updated. I signed in at the front desk. Took a plastic visitor badge. Walked down a hallway with fluorescent lights that buzzed at a frequency I could feel in my back teeth. The hearing room was small. Faux wood table. 6 chairs. An American flag in the corner with a brass eagle finial that needed polishing. The carpet was gray-blue, the kind that absorbs sound and makes every footstep feel muted, like the building itself is trying to keep things quiet. Vernon was already seated. He wore a navy sport coat that pulled across his shoulders and a tie that was knotted too tight. He sat with his legs wide, his elbow on the armrest, taking up space the way he always does, like the room owed him square footage. Next to him was his attorney, Sterling, mid-50s, silver hair combed back, a leather portfolio open in front of him, a pen he kept clicking. He had the particular confidence of a man who bills $3.50 an hour and has never once been in a room where someone outranked him in a way he couldn't see. Vernon looked at me when I walked in. He didn't stand. He didn't greet me. He looked at me the way you look at a bill you forgot to pay. Mild irritation, inconvenience. "Annette," he said. Just the name, flat, like he was confirming I'd shown up for my own undoing. I took my seat across from him, set my folder on the table, adjusted the collar of my jacket. The room was cold, the AC working overtime against the July heat outside, and the scar on my neck tightened the way it does when the temperature shifts too fast. Marcus wasn't there. His affidavit was. A single page in Sterling's portfolio. I could see the edge of it from where I sat. My father wasn't there either. I didn't expect him to be. Arthur doesn't do courtrooms. Arthur does silence and distance and trusting that other people will sort things out. He'd trusted Vernon to sort this out. That was enough for him. The door behind the panel's table opened. A woman walked in carrying a briefcase in one hand and a case file in the other. She was about my age, maybe a year or two older. Dark hair pulled back. No jewelry except a watch with a leather band. She wore a gray blazer over a white blouse, and she moved the way people move when they've spent years in rooms where posture communicates rank. She sat down, opened the file, read something, looked up. Her eyes found me across the table, and something shifted in her face. Not surprise, recognition, the kind that lives deeper than a name on a page. She held my gaze for exactly 2 seconds, then looked down at the file again. I didn't know her, but she knew me. The panel chair introduced herself for the record. "My name is Diane Orloff. I am the civilian adjudicator assigned to this case." Her voice was precise, measured, every syllable carrying equal weight. Vernon leaned toward Sterling and whispered something. Sterling nodded and clicked his pen. Orloff opened the hearing. She read the case number. She read Vernon's name as the complainant. She read the allegation. Fabrication or exaggeration of service record for the purpose of obtaining fraudulent disability benefits. Then she turned to Sterling and said, "Counsel, you may present your evidence." Sterling smiled. He opened his portfolio. He pulled out Marcus's affidavit, like a man laying down a winning hand. And I sat there, collar adjusted, scar hidden, watching my half-brother try to erase 14 years of my life with a single piece of paper signed by a man who sells chicken feed. Sterling held the affidavit at a slight angle, like he wanted the fluorescent light to catch the notary seal. He cleared his throat. He read it aloud. "I, Marcus Wright, do solemnly affirm that I have personal knowledge of the military service of Annette Blackwood. During her deployment to Iraq, Ms. Blackwood served in a translation capacity on a forward operating base. She did not participate in field operations. She did not engage in combat or combat-adjacent duties. To the best of my knowledge, her current disability claim does not reflect the nature or risk of her actual service. Sterling set the page down, smoothed the corner, looked at Orloff with the calm satisfaction of a man who believes paperwork is the same thing as proof. Vernon sat back in his chair, his shoulders relaxed. He folded his arms across his chest, and the sport coat bunched at the seams. He looked at me, not with anger, with pity. The kind of pity that says, "I'm doing this for your own good." "Ms. Orloff," Sterling said, "my client has also submitted a formal complaint to the VA Office of Inspector General. We believe the record will show that Ms. Blackwood's rating is based on a service history that has been, at minimum, substantially inflated." He clicked his pen twice. "Set it down." Orloff didn't respond immediately. She was reading. Not the affidavit. She was reading something deeper in the case file, turning pages with the particular deliberation of someone who already knows what's on the next one. "Mr. Sterling," she said, without looking up, "is this the entirety of the evidence submitted in support of the challenge?" "We believe it speaks for itself." "I didn't ask what you believed. I asked if this is the entirety." Sterling's pen hand twitched. "We also have the complainant's testimony, which he is prepared to give." Orloff closed the file. She looked at Vernon. "Mr. Blackwood, you may address the panel." Vernon stood up. He buttoned his sport coat. He had rehearsed this. I could tell by the way he squared his feet, the way he placed both hands on the table like a man at a podium. Vernon has always loved an audience. "Ma'am, I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here because I care about this country, and I care about the men and women who actually served it." He paused. Let that land. Looked at me briefly, then back to Orloff. "My sister, half-sister, she deployed to Iraq. I'm not disputing that, but she was a translator. She sat on a base. She processed paperwork. She came home with a stiff neck and somehow ended up with an 80% disability rating from the VA. 80%. You know what that means? That's tax-free compensation every month for the rest of her life. For a stiff neck." He shook his head. He put genuine sorrow into it. The performance was convincing. It always has been. I've got friends who came home missing legs, missing arms, friends who can't sleep through the night because of what they saw. And my sister's collecting a check every month because she sat in an air-conditioned tent, and now her neck hurts. He tapped Marcus's affidavit. "This man worked alongside her. He saw what she did. It wasn't what she says it was." Marcus Wright has never been within 4,000 miles of Iraq. He works at a feed supply store in Kernersville, North Carolina. He signed that affidavit in Vernon's kitchen because Vernon told him to, and Marcus has never once found the spine to say no. Vernon sat down. Sterling nodded at him. The room was quiet except for the fluorescent lights, which hummed at a pitch that reminded me of the generator in the herbal safe house. Different building, same frequency, same feeling of being sealed inside a box where the air never quite moves. Orloff turned to me. "Ms. Blackwood, would you like to respond?" I adjusted my collar. The scar pulled against the cold air. I felt it the way I always feel it. Not pain, exactly, but presence. A reminder that something happened there, that something passed through me, and I'm still here. "I processed foreign language assets," I said. "That's all I'm cleared to say." 7 words. The same 7 words I've given every person who's asked. My father, my cousin, the woman at the DMV who saw my veteran plates and wanted to know what I did over there. 7 words. Always the same. Because the alternative is a federal crime. What happens next is the reason I'm telling you this story. Sterling leaned forward. Ms. Orloff, with respect, the claimant's refusal to provide details about her service is precisely the issue. If she cannot or will not substantiate, Mr. Sterling. Orloff's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It simply occupied the room in a way that left no space for his sentence to continue. I will direct the questioning from this point. Sterling closed his mouth. His pen stayed still. Orloff looked at me. Something in her expression had changed. Not warmth, not sympathy, precision. The kind I'd seen before, in briefing rooms with no windows and no names on the door. She was assembling something behind her eyes. "Ms. Blackwood," she said, "I'm going to ask you a question. Take your time." I nodded. "During your deployment, you submitted field reports on a regular basis. In those reports, you used source designators, code names." She paused. "Can you tell me the designator you assigned to your primary source operating in the electrical supply sector near the Herbal Citadel?" The room went still. Not quiet. It was already quiet. Still. The air stopped circulating. The fluorescent hum dropped to a frequency I couldn't hear anymore, or maybe I just stopped hearing anything except my own heartbeat. Sterling looked at Orloff with blank confusion. Vernon frowned. I knew the answer. I'd known it for 9 years. I'd written it in encrypted reports on a terminal the size of a lunchbox every night for 11 months. I'd used it to identify a 54-year-old man who sold electrical supplies and had 3 daughters and trusted me enough to hand over targeting intelligence on an IED cell because I promised his family would be safe. No one in this room should have known to ask that question. No one outside of a classified compartment at Fort Meade should have known those code names existed, unless they'd read the reports, unless they'd decoded them, unless they'd spent 11 months on the other end of a satellite link, turning my words into coordinates. I looked at Diane Orloff. I looked at her the way you look at someone when you suddenly understand that the distance between you is not a table in a VA hearing room, but 11 months of shared darkness. Her at a desk in Maryland, me in a safe house in Iraq, both of us working the same war from opposite ends of an encrypted signal neither of us was ever supposed to talk about. "Carpenter," I said. 1 word, 6 letters. Said out loud for the first time in 9 years, in a room with fluorescent lights and a faux wood table, and a man in a too-tight sport coat who thought he knew what I did in Erbil. Orloff didn't blink. She didn't smile. She wrote something down. Then she reached below the table for her briefcase. She unlatched it with both hands, and she pulled out something I hadn't seen before, but recognized immediately by its markings. A thick dossier, red tab along the spine, Department of Defense seal embossed on the cover, the kind of document that doesn't travel in a regular briefcase, that requires chain of custody signatures and a reason on the record. She placed it on the faux wood table. The sound it made was heavier than paper should sound. It landed like a gavel. "For the record," Orloff said, and her voice had changed. Not louder, harder, like steel under fabric. "My name is Diane Orloff. Before I was a civilian adjudicator, I was Captain Diane Orloff, United States Army Intelligence, stationed at Fort Meade, Maryland. From September 2015 through August 2016, I was assigned to a Joint Task Force Signals Processing Unit. My duty was to decrypt and analyze field intelligence reports transmitted from forward-deployed HUMINT collectors operating in northern Iraq." She placed her hand flat on the red tab dossier. "For 11 months, I received and processed nightly field reports from a source handler operating under non-official cover inside Erbil. I read her assessments. I decoded her source designators. I tracked her targeting recommendations through the intelligence cycle until they became actionable coordinates. I never knew her face. I never heard her voice. I knew her by her operational writing, the cadence of her threat analysis, the precision of her source reliability ratings, the specific intelligence gaps she identified night after night while operating alone in a city that would have killed her if her cover had failed. She looked at me, not at Vernon, not at Sterling, at me. That officer is sitting across from me. The room didn't breathe. Vernon's arms unfolded. His hands found the table edge. His fingers pressed white against the faux wood. Orloff opened the dossier. She didn't turn it toward Vernon or Sterling. She didn't need to. She read from it with the fluency of someone who had handled classified materials for years and understood exactly how much she was authorized to disclose in this setting. This is a sealed Department of Defense operational verification file. It confirms that Annette Blackwood served as a human collector under non-official cover in Erbil, Iraq, for 11 months. It confirms she ran indigenous sources inside a hostile tribal network. It confirms her intelligence product was credited with supporting 17 Joint Task Force targeting operations. And it confirms that on the date of her extraction, her convoy was ambushed and she sustained a penetrating wound to the posterior cervical region from a 7.62 millimeter round. She closed the dossier. She placed both hands on top of it, fingers aligned, the way you rest your hands on something you are not going to let anyone take. Then she looked at Vernon. Mr. Blackwood, your sister was not a translator. She was not in an air-conditioned tent. She was running human intelligence operations alone in a hostile city under a cover identity that prohibited her from telling anyone, including her family, what she was doing or where she was. The scar on the back of her neck is from a bullet, not a stiff neck. Vernon's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Sterling reached for his pen. His hand stopped halfway. He stared at the red-tab dossier like it was a device he didn't know how to disarm. The affidavit submitted by Marcus Wright, Orloff continued, contains statements that are demonstrably and materially false. Under 18 U.S.C. Section 1001, the knowing submission of false statements to a federal agency carries a penalty of up to 5 years imprisonment and a fine of up to $250,000. I am referring this affidavit, along with the associated fraud complaint, to the VA Office of Inspector General for investigation. Vernon's chair scraped backward, just an inch. His body moved before his mind caught up. The sound cut through the room like a fingernail on glass. I didn't, he started. Mr. Blackwood. Orloff's voice was a closed door. You are no longer being addressed as a complainant. You are being advised. Anything further you say in this hearing may be included in the referral. Sterling put his hand on Vernon's arm. Vernon shook it off. His face had gone the color of the carpet, gray-blue, drained. He looked at me. For the first time in the hearing, he actually looked at me. Not past me, not through me, at me. I didn't look away. I didn't adjust my collar. I didn't move. You could have told me, he said. His voice cracked on the last word, not from emotion, from the sound of a man hearing his own certainty collapse and not knowing what's underneath. I let the silence sit for 3 full seconds. The fluorescent lights hummed. The flag in the corner hung motionless. You didn't ask, Vernon. I kept my voice level. The same tone I used in debriefs. The same tone I used with sources who needed to understand that I meant exactly what I said. You told. You told Dad. You told Marcus. You told a federal agency. You told everyone a story about me, and you never once thought to ask whether it was true. He opened his mouth again. I wasn't finished. I couldn't tell you where I was. I couldn't tell you what I did. I couldn't call our mother while she was dying because breaking cover would have gotten people killed. Real people, with families who trusted me with their lives. My voice didn't waver. My hands stayed flat on the table. That silence cost me everything, and you turned it into proof that I was nothing. The room held that sentence the way the walls of the herbal safe house held the sound of the generator, absorbing it, not letting it escape. Vernon's jaw worked. No words came. Orloff picked up her pen. She began writing. The scratch of the nib against paper was the only sound in the room, and it carried the weight of something being recorded that could not be unrecorded. Sterling closed his portfolio. He didn't click the pen. He placed it flat on the table with the careful precision of a man setting down a weapon he no longer wanted to be caught holding. The hearing ended 11 minutes later. Orloff closed the dossier, signed 2 forms, and stated for the record that Annette Blackwood's disability rating of 80% was affirmed in full, effective immediately, with no further review scheduled. She didn't look at Vernon again. She didn't need to. Sterling gathered his portfolio, stood, and left without shaking anyone's hand. He moved like a man walking away from a car accident he'd caused. Vernon stayed in his chair. His hands were still on the table, fingers spread, pressing into the faux wood as though letting go would mean admitting the surface had shifted beneath him. I stood. I picked up my folder. I walked out. I didn't look back. The hallway was empty. The fluorescent lights buzzed the same pitch they'd buzzed when I walked in. The plastic visitor badge clipped to my jacket caught the light, and I unclipped it and set it on the front desk without stopping. The woman behind the counter said, "Have a good day, ma'am." I said, "Thank you." I pushed through the glass doors, and the July heat wrapped around me like a second skin, heavy and wet, and the scar on the back of my neck throbbed once and settled. I sat in my car for 9 minutes. I know because I watched the clock. I didn't start the engine. I didn't play the voicemail. I pressed my thumb against the scar through my hair and held it there and breathed and let the heat fill the car until the sweat ran down my collar and pooled along the ridge of tissue where the 7.62 round had passed through me 9 years ago in a city where no one knew my name. Then I drove home. I didn't hear from Vernon. Not that day. Not that week. What I heard came in pieces, the way information always reaches you when you're no longer in the room. Secondhand, through people who were there or knew people who were, filtered through the particular telephone game of a family that never learned how to talk directly. The first piece came from my Aunt Dorothy. She called me 8 days after the hearing. Dorothy is Arthur's sister. She lives in Winston-Salem and plays bridge on Thursdays and knows everything that happens in the family within 48 hours of it happening. She didn't ask me about the hearing. She told me about Vernon. Sterling dropped him, she said. Same day, sent a letter that afternoon, something about exposure to liability he hadn't been made aware of. I poured a glass of water and listened. Then, the Inspector General's office called him. Twice. He didn't answer the first time. They called back. Your cousin Marcus got a call too. Marcus called Vernon that night. Dorothy heard this from Marcus's wife, who heard it from Marcus himself, standing in their kitchen with his hands shaking. Marcus told Vernon he was recanting the affidavit. Vernon shouted. Marcus hung up. It was the first time in Marcus's life he'd ended a phone call with Vernon before Vernon decided it was over. Marcus submitted a sworn recantation to the VA Office of Inspector General within 72 hours. In it, he stated that he had no personal knowledge of Annette Blackwood's military service, had never served alongside her, had never been to Iraq, and had signed the original affidavit under pressure from Vernon Blackwood. He used the word coerced. His attorney made sure of that. The second piece came 3 weeks later. Dorothy again. The OIG had completed its preliminary review and referred the matter for potential prosecution. Vernon received formal notification that he was under investigation for violation of 18 U.S.C. Section 1001, making false statements to a federal agency. The letter specified that the maximum penalty was 5 years imprisonment and a fine of up to $250,000. Vernon hired a new attorney, not Sterling. Sterling wouldn't return his calls. The new attorney was a criminal defense lawyer from Greensboro who charged $400 an hour and told Vernon, according to Dorothy, that the best case scenario was a plea agreement with a substantial fine and no prison time. The worst case was a felony conviction. "He's scared, Annette," Dorothy said. She said it carefully, the way you handle something fragile that might not deserve the care. "He's really scared." I took a sip of water. "He should be." I didn't say it with satisfaction. I said it the way you say something that's simply true. The third piece came from my father, not through Dorothy, from Arthur himself. He called me on a Sunday evening in August, 5 weeks after the hearing. It was the first time he'd called me in 14 months. He didn't say hello. He said, "I talked to Vernon." I waited. He told me what happened at the hearing. He told me about the woman who knew your reports. The line was quiet. I could hear his television in the background. A baseball game. The Braves, probably. Arthur has watched the Braves every summer for as long as I've been alive. "I should have asked you, Annette." His voice was thin, not weak. Thin, like a wire pulled too tight. "All those years. Every time you came home and said those same words, and I let Vernon fill it in. I let him tell me who you were, because it was easier than sitting with what I didn't know." I pressed my thumb against the scar. The August heat was still heavy outside, and even with the AC running, the tissue ached. "It was easier," I said. "That's not an excuse." "No, it's not." He was quiet again. The Braves crowd roared about something. A hit, a run, something that mattered to everyone in the stadium and to no one in the silence between us. "Your mother would have asked," he said. "She would have sat there and waited until you could tell her. She was patient like that. I wasn't." I closed my eyes. I thought about my mother in her classroom, doing different voices for different characters. I thought about the voicemail. 11 seconds. "Just come home, baby." "She would have," I said. "Can I see you?" he asked. "Not for anything. Not Thanksgiving, just sometime. I'd like to sit with you and not say the wrong thing." I listened to the baseball game through the phone. I listened to my father breathe. "Sometime," I said. That was all I gave him. It was more than I'd planned. Vernon's case resolved in October. Dorothy called, of course. Under a negotiated agreement with the U.S. Attorney's Office, Vernon pleaded to a single misdemeanor count of making false statements to a federal agency. The felony charge was dropped in exchange for the plea. He was sentenced to 18 months of probation, 200 hours of community service, and a fine of $15,000. His attorney had argued for $5,000. The judge set it at $15,000. Vernon's contracting license was suspended pending the completion of his probation, which meant no county bids, no overages, no revenue. For a man who measures the world in concrete and invoices, that suspension was its own kind of wound. I didn't call him. He didn't call me. Marcus sent me a card. It arrived in a plain envelope with no return address, postmarked Kernersville. Inside, on a piece of lined paper torn from a legal pad, he'd written 4 sentences in handwriting that slanted like he'd been leaning away from the words as he wrote them. "Annette, I'm sorry. I didn't have the guts to say no. You deserve better than what I gave you. I hope you know that." I read it twice. I put it in the drawer of my nightstand, the same drawer where I keep my operational commendations, the ones with no ceremony and no signature block that I'm allowed to show anyone. The card belongs there, not because Marcus earned a place next to those documents, because the honesty did. I still think about what Vernon said in that hearing room. "You could have told me." He said it like my silence was the offense, like I owed him a debriefing, like the 14 years I spent serving a country he has never risked anything for were only real if he could verify them personally, with his own eyes, on his own terms. He will never understand that my silence protected people whose names he'll never know, that the woman who decoded my field reports every night for 11 months recognized me across a faux wood table in a VA hearing room, not because of what I said, but because of how I wrote, the cadence, the structure, the intelligence gaps I identified in the dark while my mother was dying and I couldn't pick up the phone. Some of the heaviest things a person carries don't leave marks anyone else can see. And some people will look at the absence of visible weight and call you a liar. They're wrong. They just don't have the clearance to know it. I came home that night after the hearing in July and sat on my couch in the dark for a long time. The apartment was quiet. No generator hum, no encrypted terminal, no blackout curtains, just the sound of the AC and the muffled traffic on the street below and my own breathing. I pulled up the voicemail. 11 seconds. My mother's voice. 4th grade teacher. 22 years of different voices for different characters. One voice for me. I know you can't tell me where you are. Just come home, baby. I held the phone against the back of my neck. I pressed it flat against the scar, the cool glass against the raised white ridge of tissue, right where the round entered and right where it left. I closed my eyes. I came home, I whispered. The scar didn't ache. For the first time in 9 years, it was still. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever carried a truth you couldn't speak and watched someone turn your silence into a weapon against you, I'd like to hear about it. You don't have to name names. You don't have to share more than you want. Just tell me you were here tonight. Leave a comment. Tell me what you carried. And if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and hit that button now. I've got more stories like this one, and I think you'll want to hear what comes next.